I've been at UCLA for 2 years and I've taken 23 classes and I've never bought a print textbook. It's definitely possible to get by, hopefully by finding the PDFs online, just taking screenshots from the library or looking at the preview pages on Google Books. And it's just like, for me, I just didn't like dropping the money on something that I would only use for 3 months and then have to deal with reselling afterwards. So I hated buying textbooks, and I'm a frugal person, so wanted to share my tips for those of you who don't want to drop the money either. Okay, so the first step is just emailing your professor, explaining that you have financial constraints or you're just interested in seeing if it's possible to get through the class without a textbook. Generally, professors will be pretty empathetic about it because they know how expensive college is. In most cases, they'll probably say something like, oh, I'll upload the pages online, or this textbook is useful to have, but you don't need it. But there'll also be some professors that mandate that you buy the textbook because they wrote it. So that's going to be hard to wiggle out of, because they'll generally try to integrate the textbook and do assignments, and it's almost impossible to do it. And that's happened to me before my freshman year. But I really liked that professor, and the online textbook was only $12. So I was like, okay, I'll just buy the online, don't deal with the print textbook so I don't have to resell it later. And that was totally cool. But I can imagine that, for those of you who need to buy textbooks that are more expensive written by your professors, that's kind of a rough patch. But yeah, just try to explain that, you're under financial constraints, and in most cases, they'll try to accommodate you. I think that in general, there's kind of 3 categories for your textbook situations. So the first one is that there is a PDF online. Second one is that there is not a PDF. Third one is that you need an access code to even take the course. Let's explore the first scenario. You want to try to find a PDF, right? So you'd probably search up the textbook title, followed by the author or the version number. The version number typically is correlated with the ISBN, but whether or not you need it probably just depends on the class, because some professors are like, you need this specific version because the versions prior to it are super different. And some professors are like, oh, you just need to know what problems to do for your homework. After hitting enter in the search engine, then you'll probably have a ton of pages to browse through to figure out which one is the actual PDF. A lot of them are just redirecting you to sites where you can buy the book. Literally just click on all the links. I would advise having some kind of ad blocker or Malwarebytes to protect your computer. But generally you can tell if a website's sketchy. The appearance looks really strange and it says that you have to download something. That's risky. But of course there are some of the standard PDF websites that a lot of students know about, and downloading it actually does lead to a PDF with no viruses. So if you need help with that, you can just email me. But sometimes you can click on a link and it'll take you right to the PDF, which is super convenient because you can just download it to your desktop or save it to your favorites. I think that in the majority of the econ or math classes that I took, there were PDFs online. If someone tries to sell you a PDF, just try to see if you can find it online yourself, because I'm sure it's out there. Let's say that you've combed through all the websites online and you cannot find a PDF. So you have 2 primary ways of going about things. So you can either borrow the textbook from your school's library and take screenshots, or you can look for the preview pages on Google Books and see if it would be enough to help you get by in assignments. To borrow a textbook from the library, you can generally just look up the textbook title on your school's online catalog. Just make sure that it's there in person, because there's been some times when I wasn't looking very careful and it wasn't even there. But when you look for it in the library and go to check it out, a lot of textbooks will be categorized under the permanent reserve, meaning that you have to return it within 2 hours, which is a super short time period, but it's because the school recognizes that it's a textbook and a lot of students probably need it. There is a loophole though, because if you borrow a textbook with less than 2 hours before closing on that day, then you can keep the textbook until the next morning at around 9 to 10 a.m. It just depends on your university's library, which is super nice because that means you have the entire evening and early morning to work on it. But even then, I just prefer going in at the start of each quarter, taking pictures of all the textbook pages that I needed, ranging from the lectures to the problem notes, and then I would upload that from my phone to my laptop and into Google Drive, so then I wouldn't need to keep on coming in. It can be a really annoying and tedious process, but I think it just boils down how much you don't want to buy the textbook. For me, I hated having things lie around afterwards that I didn't need, but there are some people who prefer having a print textbook because they like feeling it and it helps them learn when they take notes. Your second option is by looking up the textbook on Google Books and going off of the preview pages. Sometimes you'll be lucky and there will be so many instances of where a topic is talked about. Other times there will literally be half a sentence. And I think the easiest thing is to just think about what the class probably wants you to learn about or the instructor has covered, and then somehow relate that back into what the author is saying. I think in my class I had the keyword privilege, and there's only like half a sentence on it in the preview pages of my Google textbook, and it said something like, in the United States, there are certain layers of inequalities that contribute to privilege within the geographic distribution of communities, or something like that. I'd probably say something like, within the United States, there are certain families that have been established for centuries that have been able to accumulate wealth, whereas certain more recent immigrant and refugee families may not be able to afford living in areas with magnet schools or strong infrastructure. So naturally, their students will not have equitable access to opportunities. So, the inequalities and privilege are almost inherent within the family that they're born in. And oftentimes, the geography dictates the type of educational experience they'll get. But yeah, that's just something that I kind of like speed on the spot, and you could relate in a lot of different ways with what your professor, taught about. But yeah, it kind of just depends on how specific your professor wants you to be, because some might say, oh, that sounds good, great example, while others are like, you need to be more specific. The third category is access code. So, just to preface, if your course requires an access code, there's almost no way to get around it, because a lot of the access codes provide access to like homework assignments that the professors then grade you by. So it's kind of necessary for the course. I recently had to deal with access codes for my Spanish class, and that was a pain because the access code was like $150 or so, and I was like, that is really expensive. But I was looking over the different packages that I could order for the access code, and I noticed that there was the most commonly advertised here, in big font that said, this access code will give you a hardcover textbook shipped. But I noticed a really small one that said access code, like just the access code, and I was like, oh, that's kind of odd. So then I clicked on it and looked at the fine print, and it said that it also included the online e-text. And I was like, that sounds like the online PDF that I need. So I emailed my professor to check in and confirm with him, and he was like, yeah, you can just order the smallest package. You don't need to go for the print textbook. So I was able to shave off a good amount of cash with that, but for a lot of language and LS classes in general, you will need access codes, unfortunately, and I've never had to order a course reader, I think that's what it's called, but my friends tell me that typically you do need to buy those. Not super familiar again, but yeah, that's basically the end of this video. If you have any questions about how to look for textbooks, feel free to email me at karaanwin@gmail.com or message me on Facebook. But yeah, just let me know if I can help, and hope you have a great start to your school year.